System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.
Amin TMK with Inner City Left, along with Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler. This is Sunday, June 16th. And we have some things that we want to talk about. Emoja, how are you doing today, my friend?
Ah, man, it's Father's Day, you know what I'm saying? So shout out to all you little motherfuckers I've been sunning in geopolitics for years.
We getting ready because there's a lot to talk about today. Speaking of let's talk a little bit about something that just passed the House. National Defense Authorization Act.
Ooh, it feel good to be an old ass man sometimes.
It's a fact. It's so funny. It's NDAA. Anyway.
They would have to pull some motherfucking Muhammad Ali shit for me. Old, blind bitch, you know what I'm saying? I'm not physically fit, I'm infirm.
I don't think they're going to ask you to go. I think you're going to ask you to go. So the selective service provision. What happened before this? So a little bit about the selective service provision. It's just a framework for military conscription. Okay. Like you said, Muhammad Ali in the draft, and he famously went to prison.
Why do you think they would make that an automatic thing? It seems like that should be the kind of thing that we talk a lot about in an election year. They have some kind of understanding that maybe there's about to be a really, really big war, and they'll really need to be able to make the Army and the Air Force and Space Force and Coast Guard, the Navy and the Marines much bigger really quickly.
Yeah, so essentially the selective service thing, that was something that was started by George Bush. I remember I had to go through it when I was in high school. Just basically like you. And okay, so there was a few things that you mentioned, a few not podcasts, but a few broadcasts back. We were discussing the wall on the southern border, Mexican and United States border. And you mentioned something, you were like, it can also be, of course it's used to keep people out, but it also might be used to keep people in. It looks like now this is, we don't know whether it's going to pass the Senate, but we do know that this is a large writing on the wall. And if it doesn't pass now, they're certainly getting the public ready for something that will pass, that will be something like this. And I just wanted to tell our viewers a little bit about it. It is for all, as soon as you are 18 years old, you used to get a card in the mail. Now that will be an ought. If this bill passes, selective service, it will allow all men, I think this is 18 to 29, I believe, or 23. And basically that is, like I said, the early framework. And women are on the way too, just in case.
On the way.
If you didn't, we want, she can too. And it's important to know that as well. As we know, the IDF is always touting their women force in the IDF. And I just think, again, this is one of those things where it's like sliding under the rug. We talked a little bit about the petrodollar and how the Saudis are moving away from that. And now this seems to be like a really big news thing. What do you think the American people are thinking as they look at this bill?
Again, it's something that, like you said, it flies under the radar. I think most people have no idea that this thing is happening, because it's the kind of thing that whether you're the kind of person that registers as a Republican or a Democrat, right, or those fringes, whoever they might be, but even in mainstream politics, nobody wants to see the draft, right? Nobody wants that. Ironically, George Washington talked about how much better the American military got once they got rid of conscription, because the problem with it is, if you're not a professional soldier, you want to do what it is you already was doing in life. That's what you chose. You don't want to be out there in a field getting shot at, maybe taking someone's life, maybe having your life took. That's not what you want to do. The kind of people that want to do that sign up for that. They want to do that, right? But if you're a farmer, you know what you want to get back to? Your crop. If you're a husband, you know what you want to get back to? Your wife. If you're a father, you know what you want to get back to? Your kids, right? A soldier wants the war. A soldier always wants the war. He doesn't want the war, but he wants the war. You know what I'm saying? He prepares for war. He has taken war as a something he assumes is a inevitability. If you're not a soldier, that's not the mind state you have. It's extremely difficult to put yourself in a position to have to take another human life. It's not something everybody can just quickly normalize themselves to. And it's certainly not something you can just turn off, right, after it's happened. And so this is why drafted soldiers are never great. And most people know this. It's a loser. It's a political
Ask
loser.
Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a political loser on the left and the right. And so that's why there's no discussion about it at all. It just happened, you know. But again, you have to ask yourself why, right? It takes us right to this peace conference that's happening in Switzerland.
Let me ask you before you get to that. Before we
Sure,
get to that, I wanted to jump in and ask this too, because we've been hearing so much about the recruitment issues for all these branches of the military. Why do you think they are having such? I mean, I have, of course, my own thoughts and feelings, but what do you think is the big reason why young people are not signing up and they don't want to go to the military?
Look, man, Americans love America, right? They love America. They may not love the government. Sometimes they don't love the people, right? I'm an American that loves Americans. Like that's what I would say. With the same caveats that we just did. But like they don't always love being in other places and warring. Most Americans are inherently isolationist, right? And I think it was the excesses of the Iraq war in the 2000s that really burnt the bridge on all that shit. All those people that joined up out of patriotism after 9/11, the hoorah generation, just wanted to go out and protect America at all costs. They went to Afghanistan. They saw that none of that was like what it had been sold as. So then America needed an easier war that they could win in a traditional way. So they created the whole, Iraq conflict. They went there, they won, but oh, wait, they didn't, right? Now, you sign on to be in the military for 2 years, for 4 years, your time is up. You think you can go home, but oh no, you can't because you've been stop lost, right? Like, these are things that really burnt the credit of the military, I think, with the average American. And even for the people that love America, you have rednecks that will die defending their land, that will not step 1 foot off the United States of America to defend the imperial interest. And that's where we are now. Americans don't want to die for imperialist interests that they don't even necessarily understand. No way.
Colin Powell. Yeah.
Right.
Colin Powell famously said at the UN, "I'm not here to start a war. I'm here to prevent one." Anthony Blinken, we know what happened. We know what happened after that. And we did know that they were there to start a war for WMDs that weren't there. And everybody knew it.
Everyone knew it.
And
there were all kinds of people that were giving literal intelligence from the military, from the intelligence industries, saying this is all fantasy. This is not real. There's no link. Even before the WMD, what people forget was, remember, Saddam and the Ba'athist movement were supposed to be in cahoots with Al-Qaeda. Like, these movements are antithetic. This is like thinking the government of Egypt would be in bed working with the Muslim Brotherhood. Like, it just wouldn't happen. Like, if there was no Israel, if there was no United States, these forces would be at war with each other. They have profoundly different visions of what the Middle East can look like, and they're ideologically sworn enemies. Like, to think that Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden could have anything in common other than nominally a religion, right, is just pure fantasy. And American soldiers went there and they went to Iraq and they found out, right? So that was the shift they had to do. First, it was the Baathists are in league with Al-Qaeda, right? Then it turned into weapons of mass destruction. Like, what's the new lie that we can do once the first lie was debunked? People don't even remember the first lie, right? But there were both lies. And that's what I'm saying. Like, those kind of things really hurt your credibility with the kind of people that might have wanted to be professional soldiers. And it definitely hurt their credibility with people that were soldiers at the time.
And that's why you see a lot of these former colonels and military officials, high-ranking military officials, start to push back against a lot of what the United States is doing, and because I think they see that essentially these wars are for capitalism, for places like Halliburton, for places like BlackRock. I wanted to, because we heard that, right? We got both Colin Powell, we got Anthony Blinken. I'm not here to start a war, I'm here to prevent one. We got another one a few days ago. Jens Stoltenberg, Presidente of NATO, came out there and said it as well, which brings us to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, the peace conference, or as Zelensky calls it, the PIS conference. We saw, man, there's a lot to discuss here. I just wanted to get your immediate reaction and, what is this conference about and what is it really about?
I mean, Stoltenberg, right? Secretary General of NATO. But he's more secretary than general. This is not like even the Colin Powell sensitive word. This is not a man that commands troops or understands anything about a theater of war. He has no type of understanding of. He's a bureaucrat, right? He's a weapons salesman, and that's what his job is. It's his job to make sure the spice flows, to make sure the American military-industrial complex gets this percentage. So much for the big guy. Zelensky gets his cut. Quite literally, you know what I'm saying? This many of the European manufacturers are juiced in. And when you look at it that way, the economics of the Ukraine war are inescapably irresistible for the West because it's just so much money. 60 billion here, 50 billion there, right? It's nominally under we have to save Ukraine, but Ukraine can, I say this and I will keep saying this until you guys hear me. Ukraine cannot defeat Russia any more than Mexico can defeat the United States of America. At best, you can give them a bloody enough nose to the point whereas we don't want to do this anymore. But an outright defeat, which is what NATO has consistently called for, we want to see a strategic defeat of Russia. That can't happen. It cannot happen because one of those populations has almost 10 times the population of the other. That's one. And two, that same population has nuclear weapons, right? So these things cannot happen. And I think sometimes we live in a world where the West believes that no one would ever dare militarily challenge the West, right? Well, they'll never use them. It's irresponsible to bet civilization on that. Civilization. For profits.
There seemed to be a lot of inflammatory rhetoric at the peace conference.
Who was the minister that said Russia should be broken up into 200 countries? Split up. Russia, the country, should be split. Like the West has the power to do that.
And that is when you say the quiet part out loud. This reminds me of when I forget who it was in the Knesset was talking about Greater Israel, and they were showing these maps and stuff. You're not supposed to say that the entire reason you're in Ukraine right now is because you want to destabilize and weaken Russia. You see that there's, like they said, you have a Dagestani region, you have a Chechen region, you have a Serbian region, you have regions of people who are more Asiatic. You have all these different, again, which should be great, right? Isn't that what America is built on? A melting pot of people coming together to build build upon a larger idea. And you see that all the conversation, I was like, hey, we're not pushing into Ukraine because we want to do something with Russia, seems like a lie. The prime minister of Italy, a literal fascist, a granddaughter of Mussolini. There it is. Her rhetoric was just as inflammatory. Basically, if you don't stop, we're going to stop you. I don't know. I don't know the track record of the Italian military, but to me, it seems like they don't have a whole lot of doves. And when you're going up against a heavyweight, what many people think is the most powerful military, or at least the most powerful army, I didn't say that. People who know more than I do say that against Russia. What's going to happen here? I think this is the real question.
You have to
Are we
remember
on a one-way road to a Western backed European conflict with Russia plus?
at this point, I feel like conflict is inevitable because I don't see anyone in the West that has the force of personality and the skill of wielding, right, the apparatus of state. Because it's two things. First, you have to have the kind of personality where you're like, I don't want this thing to happen. I'm gonna make it not happen. But then you also have to have the skill of understanding who are the people that are working in the apparatus. People talk about the deep state, but there are people that are not elected in this government that will have jobs forever. I mean, because they're so-called specialists in their field, and it's very difficult to have these people removed. Do you really think that every 4 to 8 years, every single person in the Department of Agriculture gets fired and rehired? Every person
That would be impossible to run a government like that.
Right. So now start thinking about places like the Department of Defense or Department of State, right? There are people that have been working there for 20 years, for 30 years. And if you don't know who those people are, and if you don't have relationships with how to get out of them what you want, the ship is going to run, man. I mean, looking at Biden wander off, into the neither realm, barely grasping sentience should let you know the state will run itself if it has to, right? So it seems like there's too much money in the provocation to take an intelligent look at what happens if this goes the other way. In fact, in some ways, there's a lot of people that are deeply embedded that feel like conflict is inevitable, right? As they see it, the East versus the West. So it's better that it happens now on our terms while we still got the muscle, while we're still, straight up Godfather stuff, right?
Or the most muscle we're going to have.
Right. We're stronger than the Russians now. We're stronger than the Chinese now, but we might not be in 10 years. So now is the time, right? Without the understanding of what that type of conflict looks like. Right. But also understanding inherently, if we're going to do this, we're going to need a lot more soldiers. How can we make sure that apparatus starts to work? They made a really big deal when Putin went to the Russian people and started to do recruiting, right? All the Russian army has been defeated. Look, they're having to go and do all of these enlistment drives, right? But again, Russia meets their goals, whereas Ukraine does not. To say nothing of where the United States is or isn't. Because even if you're able to meet your enlistment goals, how are you going to match those retention goals, right? This is the problem Ukraine is running into. Ukraine is 30,000 a month. They're recruiting 30,000 soldiers into their effort a month, but they're losing 50,000, right? So this is unsustainable. But beyond that, what type of quality training are you getting? Again, you worked at Starbucks a month ago, and then, the gulags found you. They beat you up, quite literally, not a metaphor, beat you up, put you into the press gang, gave you, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, let's say a month of military training. And now you're going up against a Russian who's been in the trenches for 2 years. What chances do you have?
Yeah, who gets to go back home, that they get to be cycled out. I want to ask you this too, because this is something, again, we're talking about the ramping up for World War III. It always seems like all the world wars start in Europe. I wonder why that is. But Vladimir,
it's because Russia is a colonialist power. I don't remember the Russians in Africa.
Where are Russia's colonies? Where are the Russian colonies at? Yeah, another thing that they're trying to, at the PIS conference, trying to get everyone to be like, oh, Russia's a colonial power. Like, you're France. You can't point the finger at somebody and say that. But
it's just not a serious conversation when France is still a colonial power. And the United States is absolutely a colonial power.
Black Panther called y'all out, and you got in your feelings.
Right.
Because you were unable to realize, our imperialist nature has left many of the African colonies, all of the African colonies that we have touched in financial ruins, economic ruins. And again, in the larger conversation around, Congo and Belgium and all these other European nations that are the real colonialists and the real imperialists.
what's disappointing to me about this peace conference, and again, if you watch the broadcast, we've been talking about this was a big thing to come for quite some time. I think it's important to talk about the people who weren't even there. The Saudis are not even there.
MBS getting ready for Hajj.
Right.
Coming up.
Chinese are not there. But most importantly, the Russians are not there. Like, how can you have a peace conference? You don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies. So to have a peace conference where the Russians ostensibly are not even allowed to be there, and
you know what that's called? You know what that's called? When you don't have the person that you're at war at the peace conference? A war conference.
It's a war conference. And it seems like that's what's happening. This is Europe, once again, saber rattling and preparing themselves for what will be a disastrous war with probably the most capable land army in the world. Now, I say probable because there are other really capable armies. Like the Turkish army is incredibly capable. But if there were any large type of conflict as it relates to NATO and Russia, I don't know if NATO could reliably count on Turkey to utilize their 500,000 plus army, which is quite capable and quite probably the only real hope that the Europeans would have in defending themselves if it was what they claim it is, which it's not, Yeah, I mean, what's happening in Ukraine, I cannot overstate this, is a civil war between Russian peoples. Like the Ukrainians are Russian people. The Kievan Rus goes back as far in time as, it's a tribe. The Kievan Rus is a tribe. And that's the Ukrainians and that's the Russians.
Yeah, and Vladimir Putin he stated, and I wanted to ask you about this because it seems like another shrewd move by President Putin. And he basically said, hey, look, this is the peace deal. We keep what we got and we'll end it right here. Let's stop it right now. And he can say that because he knows there is no possibility for that happening. This is very similar, in my opinion, and you can let me know how you feel about it. Apparently Netanyahu approved peace plan that was
100%.
And and Hamas said, we'll accept it.
Yeah. It's a poison pill in that the ego would never allow it. And I don't even just mean the Ukrainian ego. I mean the NATO ego, right? But also from a real politic point of view, that means a cessation of hostilities, which means no more Q2 earnings. We have to keep selling tanks. We have to keep selling these weapon systems. But these kind of backlogs really start to show that the separation, right? The lack of unity within NATO. Like, for example, we talked about it in the last broadcast. Finally, Turkey is being approved for their F-16s, right? That's finally happening. It's like it's a $23 billion deal where the United States is finally going to give Turkey the F-16s. But why is that happening, right? They've been embarrassed about the fact that they've been saying they're going to give these F-16s to Ukraine, and Ukraine was at the front of the line. Turkey's been part of NATO for 40 years, and they still have to wait behind this group that's not even in there. Like, that's a slight, right? Here's the other thing. You ask yourself, why would a country like Turkey want the F-16? I think it's important to remember that Americans tend to have a much lower expectation of where the technology of other countries is. Like, Turkey is a nation, one of the few nations in the world creating 5th generation fighters, right? They make the best drones in the world by many accounts, right? They're utilized in the Ukrainian conflict. So why would they need 4th generation American tech? Well, the thing is, originally it was supposed to be 5th generation tech. The original deal was for Turkey to buy F-35s, had the deal signed. Trump came in, said, no way, we're giving those Muslims F-35s. But the reason why was, well, the Turkish have bought air defense from Russia, and we don't want to integrate Russian technology and NATO technology. I mean, that's literally what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's literally what's happening in Ukraine.
And they
right
also
now.
feel spurned. You have to think they feel spurned from the EU as well. and the discussion that Ukraine could possibly be a part of the EU.
But again, you're not pulling your economic weight. Turkey is expected to buy these things from American military suppliers to keep their profits up. You're not
like they have to work. They have to work harder to be a part of NATO. They have to work harder to try to be a part of the European economy.
And at the end of the day, the thing that we have learned in the theater of battle is the S-300, the S-400, the S-500, the Russian air defense system is much better than the American Patriot system. It's cheaper. It has a better success rate in bringing down unidentified objects in airspace, right? So again, from a realpolitik point of view, Turkey is trying to defend their airspace, and Americans are like, nah, buy this system that don't work as good but costs more, right? And because they don't do that, you're punished. Well, you can't have the F-35. The best you can have is the F-16, right? And then even the F-16 deal gets delayed and delayed and delayed. And another president could come in and say, well, we're not even going to do that. It's because of those things that you can't even be sure that in the case of a large conflict, Turkey would do everything they could to be they would be the Greyjoys, right? Not to go all Game of Thrones. They will find a reason to not commit to the field of battle until they're absolutely forced to do so. And who could force them, right? And that puts them in a great position of bargaining because they could go either way. They could go with the Russians. They could go with the West.
Yeah, it does seem like the Western countries are clicking up and the global majority countries are clicking up. And there are a few people that are sort of in the middle. I think maybe the Saudis would be another country in that mix. And it's going to be interesting. Not going to be interesting is not the word. It will be enlightening to see what happens if the escalation continues, which again, it looks like it's going to. InnerCityLeft.com. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Player FM. Wherever you find podcasts, you can hit us up on our Podbean as well. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. I'm going to give a shout out to our patrons if I can. You can support us for as little $5 a month. You get a cool shirt for a certain tiers. Well, let's give some love to No Ground, Robbie, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. Hit us up on Inner City Left on Instagram. Any thoughts? Any feelings, Tanky, my very good friend, before we slide out of here?
Man, no, that I cannot imagine. Can you imagine, just in closing, how much more the spook activity in Cuba has to be right now? I mean, it's got to be a lot of visitors on the island. Don't want to fly on those walls.
Yeah. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.